Good morning. Good morning, everybody. It's good to see you all this morning. Welcome to 1111 this morning. I'm Tom McDermott, one of the associate ministers here for you all who are visiting with us for the first time. And this is 1111 downtown, and it's good to see you all here. As people continue to come in, here's what I want you to do. You'll see your card there. I want everybody to fill out the card today. Okay, everybody fill out your card today. Put your email and your name on it. That's all you got to do is put your email and your name on it. Oh, no, we need an address, don't we? We need an address. We're all going to come to your house. Yeah, so we need an address. No, because we're going to send out this card in the next couple of weeks. And I don't know about you, but yesterday it made me think about this because I went to the mailbox. And I don't know what kind of mail you guys get, but I went to the mailbox and usually get the usual thing. Lots of ads, lots of bills. IRS stuff and tax documents and then for me, early AARP, I get those things 3 times a week for joining them. But every now and then I want to look for something that's inspiring. And in 2 weeks, you're gonna get something in the mailbox that is truly inspiring and will have you thinking all week long and for the next couple of weeks. And I don't want you to miss out on it, right? So hope you'll fill that out, put your address down there so we can make sure you get on the list, because we're just working from people who show up for attendance and over a period of a couple of months. And we do this every couple of months. This next one's pretty fun. It's going to be fun. Also, you will notice, I'll mention some of this a little bit later on, but you'll notice you sat down on a card, or maybe you picked it up before you sat down on it. We are in the 3rd week of Lent, our season of Lent on our 40 days towards Easter, and this Sunday, our theme is This Is Us, and we'll be talking about that today as well, but our theme is This Is Us. And one of the things that we're talking about today is we encourage one another. Last week we talked about we proclaim. The week before that, I forget what we talked about, but it was community. No, our community is today. And we encourage, yes, okay. Anyway, 2 weeks is a long time to remember. Write your address down so you get a card in the mail. Okay, so anyway, what we want you to do with this is we want you to take this card, and I hope you'll think about someone you know in particular who is, loneliness. A lot of people are just feeling challenged by what's going on in the world today. A lot of people in the Methodist Church are feeling challenged by what's going on today. So we just thought if we gave everybody a card, you might know somebody in particular who just simply needs a message that simply says kindness goes a long way, and to keep it going. And maybe even if you decide to write your own little note on the back that we're here going there with you. Something to encourage someone. If you know someone just casually, we encourage you to pass it along and to share this card with someone. We'll talk a little bit about that later, but I want to encourage you to take it with you and to pass it. There's extras in the back if you need that. Also, speaking of what's been going on with the Methodist Church, one of our great associate ministers, she's a great biblical scholar, just getting her PhD in New Testament, Genia Garina Rodriguez is a new member on staff for the last 6 months, and she will be doing a class at the 9:30 hour and 11 o'clock hour for the next 4 weeks, and I believe it's for the next 4 Sundays, yeah. And it will be a one-time class, so if you can make the 9:30 hour on one of those Sundays, that'd be great. But she's really just talking about the biblical sort of narrative and discussion around this whole issue that our church is experiencing itself being divided over. And a lot of times I think we find ourselves with people who are saying certain things or quoting certain scripture, and we don't have that understanding of exactly what is the Bible really saying, period. We presume things, or we presume narratives that we've been told. So this would be a great hour sort of introduction to the whole thing and to give you a little more basis for understanding the Bible around this same topic. So I hope you can be a part of that. We still have a few spaces. We have about 5 spaces left in the Sacred Ireland tour. It's happening at the end of August, the second half of August. So if you can be a part of that, we'd love to have you join along. Right now we're 22 people, and I think we've got about 5 spaces left. So hope you can join. Let me know if you are interested, and I'll send you the info. I think that's about it. Can we think of anything else right off the bat that we need to? It's so good to have you all here. This morning's topic is we encourage one another. That's the church-wide topic. In here, I'm entitling it, We Provoke One Another. And you already know that that's not exactly what I mean, right? because that's how we do things in here. So we're glad to have you with us this morning, and let's begin our worship now with our welcome candle.
So our welcome candle is glowing, so please read with me and we'll welcome each other. Come, come, whoever you are, wanderer, worshiper, lover of leaving. It doesn't matter. Ours is not a caravan of despair. Come, even if you have broken your vows 1,000 times, come again.
When you hear the sound of coming, hear the drummers drumming, I want you to join together with the band. We don't move in a particular direction, we don't make no connections. I want you to join together with the band.
We don't know where we're going, but it's the season for knowing. So we've had a little blast from the past there from the 60s. Know what the band is? Who knows the band? Thank you. At least we know who the band is. Okay, The Who. So I invite us all to have just a moment of prayer. Join me with a prayer, please. Holy One, we come together this morning. We join together in this band of unknowing. We find ourselves caught up in the challenges, the struggles, the tensions of our everyday life, just living in our households, just making it from one day to the next in our own lives, and not to mention the reality of the world that we live in, which is full of tensions across the globe. We don't know exactly where all of this is going, and yet we do know that it is a season for knowing. We know that we rest and live and have and move our being in you and you within us. And so for this, we know that there is much to be a part of, and we are grateful to have this chance to be together in community and to experience this process of seeking and of knowing. We give thanks in the name of the one in whom we live and move and have our being. Amen. So we're doing something kind of fun this morning, and we really filled up this morning's service with a lot of interesting things. But because we decided, we were talking about this, and because we were thinking, okay, this is us. I don't know if it's echoing to y'all. Is it echoing to y'all a little bit? Maybe we can bring down the echo if there's a way to do that. Not much way to do that. It's a weirdness today. Okay, well, I'll tell you what, I'll talk louder. You bring it down, and I'll talk a little bit louder. Maybe not quite that much. Maybe there's not much to do. That's good. That'll work. Yeah. Okay, anyway. Okay, so we're going to do a little bit introducing a couple of folks each week to our community as a way of us getting to know one of us or two of us from week to week, and hopefully pull from a little bit of diversity. So I'm going to invite someone to come forward for our first one here this morning. I'm going to invite Daryl Parker to come up here. Come on up, Daryl. And as you're coming up, I want to introduce him a little bit. Daryl's an engineer, works at Lockheed, and I've known Daryl for several years now. And Daryl has been involved in this community for, I guess, several years now, since probably 5-6 years you've been coming and been a member for a few years. And then, of course, I did his wedding with Laura and was excited to be a part of that. And then Daryl has been involved in doing the drum group, which has been a lot of fun. And so I decided I'd ask just a couple of questions. I have prepared these amazing 2 questions here. And Daryl, I get a microphone up here. We're going to try to set up this sort of bistro style, but we really didn't have that all together here yet. So, so one of the things, and there's a great picture of Daryl right there. Yeah. Daryl, what is that on your shirt?
Yeah, I didn't know what it was until after I realized it was a symbol of LGBT community.
Which
okay. I fully embrace. But I've been traveling all over the country, and I was in Europe in that picture. And I wonder why I got the smiles and sometimes the grimaces, and then I realized later. But I proudly wear it.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, yeah, maybe hold the mic. Yeah, that may be easier. Yeah, it's not quite picking you up. Yeah. So a rainbow robot.
Yeah.
Yeah, nice.
Yeah.
Nice. So, Daryl, in order to sort of help people get to know you a little bit, what would be one thing that if we were going to be able to say we really know you well, you would want us to know about you?
Yeah, loaded question. Well, you've kind of hit on it. I'm an engineer, but that's just something I do. From LA originally, South Central area. Moved away and been in Texas 15 years roughly now. But I guess about me, I'm kind of an eclectic person. I love traveling and experiencing new things all the time. I found myself in all sorts of places, meeting all kind of unique people. My wife and I love to hike. We love the outdoors. Music. I love music. I met my wife dancing. That's something interesting. We both love to dance, and I met her at a kind of dance and kind of a community where we frequent. I think the thing I love the most about my self-expression is philosophy. I would consider myself a modern philosopher. I don't study philosophy in the classical sense, but I do find myself talking about deep philosophical things of life, spirituality, of society, how we interact as human beings. So that's something I really think I enjoy, and I spend a lot of time, hours, sometimes too many hours, but that's just what I enjoy, and just exploring life as we experience it today.
Yeah, one of the cool things about that aspect in you is early on, maybe about a year or so ago, several of the guys in here and you and I were getting together on weekly on a Wednesday. We were doing something we called craft theology, where we would drink beer and talk about God. And
Yes, sometimes not always in that order.
not always in that order, right? Yeah, and sometimes not either, or
Yeah.
just one or the other, but not always both. But yeah, and we'll start that back up again too. It was a really fun and engaging time with just some guys getting together on Wednesday nights and talking. But so Daryl, one of the things you talked about early on when I met you was you had this sort of fascination with how we experience these moments of wonder,
Right.
of aha moments, these kind of insightful moments, and.
Right.
And you've already begun pursuing mindfulness training yourself, and to hopefully do some education with others. But what would be one thing that gives you hope that you see in the world, or that you see in your community or in your life, something you see as a hopeful trend or a sign of hope?
Yeah, in the area of mindfulness, it's really about being aware of how we interact with one another, right? Of being aware of the needs of the world around us and those moments that we find ourselves connected with other people. So the question of hope, I was sharing with Laura when I saw my name and realized that I'd have to stand up here and talk, is I was a little shaken this morning because, again, I like to travel and I like to experience new things. And I find myself amongst some very eclectic and interesting people as a result. So one of the areas I frequent, because I enjoy music, is the Deep Ellum area. Right? And I read a story this morning, as I do reviews online sometimes of places I've visited and traveled to. So I was doing a review of a place I visited in Deep Ellum, and what I found out as I was reviewing, this young lady was shaken. She frequents Deep Ellum, and there was I guess Thursday night, there was an event where a young lady was attacked. She was a woman of color, and it was a racially motivated, is what they think, that caused this to occur. And so the question she asked is, as a woman of color, is it advisable that I continue to visit the Deep Ellum area? And of course, I'm visiting there, and I'm a man of color, and I'm thinking, okay, and I visit there by myself at times. Is this a safe place? My answer to that question in the context of hope is that yes. I mean, we have to live, right? Life is going to move on. Our fears are going to be there, but how do we want to experience life? Through the eyes of fear, or the hope that we can live into through change? And that hope, to me, lives in the presence of love in each of us, that we carry with us and that we can express if we're aware and if we're paying attention to how love shows up in those moments when it needs to. In the moment when there's hate in our midst, do we want to embrace and ride the wave of hate, or do we want to go counter to that and ride the wave of love that moves and flows through each of us, through being human and through the connectiveness that we can find ourselves in? And so the hope that I live into is the hope that we can all overcome the moments of hate through moments of love.
Thanks very much. Let's give Daryl a hand. Daryl, thank you for sharing. I appreciate it.
Daryl, you're also a very snappy dresser. I appreciate that. You always look sharp. I applaud that. Folks, I would like to invite y'all to now stand and sing with us. We've got a reggae hymn that I want you to join in on, would you please? This is also the perfect time to bring your offering to the table. Here we go. Lyrics on the screen, y'all ready? Right here. Boom. One love, one heart. That's right. Let's get together and feel alright. Come on, sing one love. One love. Oh, baby. One heart. Give thanks and praise to the Lord. verse. Let's go. Let them pass their dirty remarks. There's one question I'd really love to ask. Is there a place for the hopeless sinner who would hurt one another just to save their own beliefs? Now the chorus. One love. What about the one love? One heart. Let's get together and feel alright. As it was in the beginning. One love. So it shall be in the end. One heart. Give thanks and praise to the Lord, and I will feel alright. Let's get together. Let's get together and feel alright. Verse 2 now. My people get ready. There's a train a-coming. Picking up passengers from coast to coast. And faith is the key. Open the doors and board them. There's room for every woman, every child, and every man. Sing with me now. Oh. One love, one love, one heart. Let's get together and feel alright. Sing one love, one love, one heart. Thanks and praise to the Lord, and I will feel alright. Last line here. Let's get together and feel alright. Good work, folks. This is your chance to say hello to one another and offer a sign of peace to anyone you can find out there. Go for it.
Wesley.
As we find our seats, we have a second interview. And before I bring this one of us up here, I want to say a little bit about her. I've known Jennifer for years and years and years, but way, way back. I mean, she's like 38, and I'm like 52, something like that. Yeah. So we have. I was the pastor of youth here, minister of youth here, years and years ago. And she was one of my youth. And so it's been fun to be back here, and of course to have her involvement and her family's involvement. And I did their wedding, and when Thomas was very small, I did his baptism. So it's just a real joy to have the family plugged in and involved here in this community as well as in the church. They've been really involved in the church's life throughout all these years. And so what we're going to do is going to bring up, do we have a picture of Jennifer? There we go. Yeah. Now, if you don't get the Brian, Jennifer, and Thomas Jolin Christmas card, you're missing out on something. So you'll want to see them afterwards and get on their mailing list. They have novel Christmas cards that come out every year. It's talk about something you just look forward to receiving. They do know how to give some joy. So let's welcome Jennifer Jolin up here, please. Okay, so Jennifer, I have some special questions for you.
Okay.
Yeah, it's the same ones I asked
good.
Daryl. So Jennifer, I've told a little bit about you, but what would be one thing you would want us to know about you that we could say we really know you pretty well?
Well, your introduction kind of spoke to it. Actually, I've been thinking since I heard about this question, but just over the past few weeks. And part of what I would want somebody to know about me is that I'm Methodist. And it's been a challenging few weeks, and there have been times that we've contemplated leaving or changing or doing something different. And then I think about just even people in this room that I've had longtime connections to and throughout the congregation. And like Tom said, Gaston Foote married my parents and baptized me, and Thomas, my youth director, married me. Linda baptized Thomas and did my dad's funeral. So it's hard to think about leaving, even when I'm frustrated. So I think that's just the connections and looking around and seeing people that I've known in all different times of my life that have been part of this congregation, and that's why I stay.
Yeah. Are you finding some hope
Yes.
for this congregation? I mean, for the Methodist Church in general.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Tell us something else that gives you a sense of hope in your everyday work, your week, or maybe even the world. What gives you hope?
Well, one thing is I'm a social worker, and I've been working in the field of adoption for over 20 years, and it's a very challenging job, and there are times that I do lose hope, and I deal with kids that are in foster care and all kinds of different situations. And then right before I got up, I saw a text from a family who just met their 4 children this weekend that are very young and that they are planning on adopting, and they're so excited and thrilled. And so when I think about the change that's going to happen in those kids' lives forever and how they'll change the generations to come, that gives me hope. And the other things that gives me hope are teenagers. And they get a lot of flack. And I was one, and it doesn't feel like it was very long ago, but I guess it was.
You were. Yeah.
But Tom was one of my youth directors.
You basically ran the youth program, I think it was.
Yeah, for sure. But then when I did leave here, I had the opportunity to work for John Taylor and was a youth minister at his church. And when Brian and I got married, we volunteered with our youth group for about 10 years, and now our son is in the youth group. And there's excellent leadership in our church there. And so the things, just this current issue that our church is dealing with, the teenagers that I've talked about it kind of don't even get why it's a thing. And that gives me hope that we're going to move forward with their awesome leadership.
Thanks, yeah. Let's give Jennifer a hand. Thank you so much, Jennifer. Thanks for sharing with us. So over the next couple of weeks, I'll be calling some of you, and I hope you'll be willing to come forward and share as we try to get to know just a little bit about some of the folks that make up our community. This is who we are.
So, visitors, excuse me, now we move to our Kairos moment, and just let me tell you what that is. We just stop right here, right now, between the last thing we did and the next thing we will do. It is a spiritual practice. It is a physical practice that is really good for us, just to stop and take some deep breaths, realize that we are all safe in here together. You're safe in your chair. And often we just sit and breathe. But today I have a prompt for you. After you find the rhythm of your deep breath and your slow exhale, I would like for you to focus on one person in this room that is not your family member, somebody that you know or someone that you have just seen. If you're visiting with us, maybe somebody's face you've already noticed today. And as you breathe, I invite you to focus on them and wonder about them. Pray for them. Imagine what is life like for them, and give thanks. So now, if it feels good to you, find your breath, maybe close your eyes, take some deep breaths and some slow exhales. And so as we open our eyes now, we give thanks for the gift of time together and the breath of life.
You want me to hold this for you? Or?
Thank you.
Got it. Okay.
The reading this morning is from Hebrews chapter 10. Let us hold fast to the confession of our hope without wavering, for he who has promised is faithful. Let us consider how to provoke one another to love and good deeds, not neglecting to meet together, as is the habit of some, but encouraging one another, and all the more as you see the day approaching.
What's wrong with the world, mama? People living like they ain't got no mamas. I think the whole world's addicted to the drama, only attracted to the things that bring you trauma. Overseas, yeah, we try to stop terrorism. We still got terrorists here living in the USA. The big CIA, the Bloods and the Crips and the KKK. But if you only have love for your own race, you only leave space to discriminate. And to discriminate only generates hate. And when you hate, then you're bound to get irate. Yeah. Man, this is what you demonstrate. That's exactly how anger works and operates. Man, you gotta love just to set it straight. Take control of your mind and meditate. Let your soul gravitate to the love.
People killing, people dying, children hurt and hear them crying. Can you practice what you preach? Would you turn the other cheek? Father, 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 help us with the guidance from above. People got me questioning, where is the love?
Where is the
love?
Where is the
love?
Where is the
love?
It just ain't the same, always unchanged. Nowadays are strange, is the world insane? If love and peace is so strong, why are the pieces of love that don't belong? Nations dropping bombs, chemical gases filling lungs of little ones. With ongoing suffering as the youth die young. Ask yourself, is the love really gone? I could ask myself, what's really going on? This world that we're living in, people keep on giving in, making wrong decisions, only visions of the dividends, not respecting each other. Deny thy brother. A war is going on, but the reason's undercover. The truth is kept secret, it's swept under the rug. If you never know truth, you never know love. Where's the love, y'all? Come on.
I don't know.
Well, where's the truth, y'all?
I don't know. People killing, people dying, children hurting, hear them crying. Can you practice what you preach? Would you turn the other cheek? Father, 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 help us with guidance from above. People got me questioning, where is the love?
Where is the
The love,
Where is
the love, where is the love, the love, the love?
Where is
The love,
Where is
the love, where is the love, the love, the
I feel the weight of the world on my shoulder as I'm getting older, y'all. People get colder. Most of us only care about money making. Selfishness got us flowing in the wrong direction. Wrong information always shown by the media. Negative images in the main criteria. Infecting young minds faster than bacteria. Kids want to act like what they see in the cinema. Yo, whatever happened to the values of humanity? Whatever happened to the fairness and equality? Instead of spreading love, we're spreading animosity. Lack of understanding these lies away from unity. That's the reason why sometimes I'm feeling under. That's the reason why sometimes I'm feeling down. There's no wonder why sometimes I feel I'm under. Gotta keep my faith alive to love is found.
Where is the love? Where is the love? Where is the love? The love, the love. Father, 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 help us with guidance from above. People got me questioning, where is the love?
Sing it with me, y'all. We only got. That's all we got. Something's wrong with it. Something's wrong with it. Something's
That's all we got.
Wow, it's a lot of words, Brad. That's pretty impressive. So we got this text here from Hebrews, and it's interesting about the book of Hebrews, the epistle to Hebrews. It's seen as written by Paul, but most scholars think it was actually written much later than that probably written after Paul had died, but it was written in the context of Paul's understanding of the struggles of the church, of the early community of followers of Jesus. And you have these churches all over the place now, because after the temple destroyed in 70 A.D., and Jews, the two remaining sects of Jews, which were basically the Orthodox Jews and the followers of Jesus Jews. And so, and then of course you had the Gentiles that were coming into the church. So you had this really interesting, well, some would say complicated and difficult mix of people making up the church, which interestingly 2,000 years later isn't a whole lot different from what we find today, right? We still have this interesting and sometimes conflicting mix of people who make up the church. And it's just a part of reality. But Paul understood that, and then this pseudonymous writer who uses Paul's name has the same understanding. The scholars think that actually this was probably a missive that sort of circulated, kind of a letter that went to a lot of different churches. So it was a common sort of theme of this struggle. Where do we focus on it? How do we get back to focusing on what's important? How do we, with the diversity and the challenges of people coming from backgrounds, you had the conservative Jews who were saying, if you're going to be a part of Jesus' followers, they're still Jews. They're just following Jesus, this Jew. And if you're going to be a part of that, you've got to be a Jew. You've got to be converted to Judaism. The conservatives were saying, you have to do this, you have to look like this, to be like this, to practice like this, then you can follow Jesus. But the other followers of Jesus who were saying, like, it's open, people. The doors are wide open. Everybody's welcome to come in and be a part of this community of compassion. This is how the world changes. They were also aware of the fact, as you got the end of that text, that this imminent day of Jesus' return wasn't so imminent. We're now in the second century, in the early part of the second century. So now we're trying to understand, what does it mean to be a part of God's kingdom? Is God's kingdom already happening? And what does that look like if it's already happening? So we call it in here, we call it God's kingdom, because it's how we connect with one another, connect with God in the midst of all of our lives, that we are already transforming the world in the here and now. So the question for the early church then, how do we get to the love? Where is the love with all of this conflict and all of this diversity and this challenge of being with one another? So he says, in all of this, he says, provoke one another to acts of love and good deeds. Provoke. Now, I'm going to play with this word because I like to play with words. Consider how to provoke one another to good deeds, to love and good deeds, not neglecting to meet together. That's just a plug. Y'all show up every Sunday. Not neglecting to meet together, as is the habit of some, because some were getting rather distressed and frustrated with the tension. I mean, what keeps people together, right? You talk about what keeps people together. You talk about what inspires you. You talk about what gives you hope. And that's hopefully what the kingdom is about. So don't neglect the getting together, as is the habit of some, but encouraging one another, and all the more as you see the day approaching. Now, the author uses the word encouraging, and he uses the word provoke. Now, I want to play with this idea that provoke does not necessarily mean encourage. But when we typically think of provoke, we typically think of this idea of irritating. And as you know, if you've looked at my business card, I don't have a problem with irritating people. But I want to do it in a creative way, right? So, but my wife reminds me sometimes I need to lay back a little bit on the irritation factor. It doesn't win votes, for example, necessarily. But if you look at the business card, it says Tom McDermott, Reverend such and such associate. Then it says creative irritant. I didn't give myself that name, by the way. It was Melinda Smoot, our communications director, who decided to put creative irritant underneath there, because I used to be on the communications team. So, and my writers group. My writers group used to love it because they would come in with their manuscripts and they would read the manuscripts and I would just go, it doesn't work. And they'd say, is that helpful? And I'd say, I don't know, but it doesn't work. So they'd have to go back and they'd have to rebuild and rethink. And eventually they'd realize it didn't work, but I couldn't always put my finger on it. So I want to talk with you about what this idea of provoke means. Proverbs 27:17 has this great line that says, "Iron, it's as if iron is sharpening iron, so a person sharpens a friend. As iron sharpens iron, so a person sharpens a friend." What is that idea? I mean, think about that idea of provoking or provocation as iron sharpening iron. It's pretty rough at first, right? It's a pretty hard process early on. And yet it becomes somewhat smooth. Eventually, you find the fine detail of sharpening knives and sharpening iron. But early on, this idea of provocation. So let's play with the word. To provoke actually means not angering. I mean, you can have that notion. There is that angering, risky, threatening idea. But the older etymology of the word actually means to bring out or to entice, to call out or to stir or challenge forward. This idea of pro and voke, this idea of finding a way forward, but not just simply you being the way forward, but luring others a way forward. And I want to challenge you that it is less about you trying to convince somebody else to be something and more about you changing yourself in order to open the way for others. I wanted you to think about that as a provocation. Not so much that it's about how can I provoke you, but what do I need to do to change myself? Because if we know anything, we already know in this culture that we live in that if somebody comes up with an opinion that we're diametrically opposed to, going right at them with the opposite of that opinion is not effective. And most of us don't ever come out of those situations with a sense of, that was satisfying, that worked, they changed their mind, and now they're going to be just like I want them to be. That never works. And yet, why do we keep doing it? Right? Why do we keep going there? And I've told you, I mean, we've talked about it in here before. I think neurologically we're captive to the chemistry of our brains, but we're not captive consciously. Right? We are captive in our unconscious, but we can consciously change some of that chemistry by being intentional, by finding new ways. So the provocations oftentimes have to happen with us if we're going to be able to bring about this sense of openness and this sense of love that allows for grace, that allows for God's presence to heal, to redeem, to change things. We have to change ourselves. Sometimes that means that instead of trying to provoke or to irritate with a new idea, it means not saying anything. It means, yes, it is hard, isn't it? It is hard. And sometimes you got to speak out against injustice. And sometimes you got to speak out against oppression. But I guarantee you're just preaching to the choir 90% of the time. That's the challenge of provoking love, of bringing about opportunities for love, is because 90% of the time when we speak out, we're just preaching to the choir. And while sometimes it gives us some sense of satisfaction to kind of go at it hard with somebody, it also sometimes just produces the opposite consequence. And not just for the other person, for ourselves. How many of you have ever been in an argument or been at a place where you found yourself in a debate and you represented this side with fervent you were just arduously arguing your point and coming back at somebody angrily, and you feel for the moment you were vindicated, and how many of you feel wonderful after that? You know? It's like an addiction, people. It's just the same chemistry, right? It's the same adrenal glands that are activated. And so what do you do when you get on a drug and it gets you going? You come down off of that drug and you start feeling bad. Or you start feeling this withdrawal. You start feeling this sadness. Or you start reinforcing this negativity bias that's a part of who we are. The only way to truly change people with provocations of love is to be provocations of love, to change ourselves in a way where we are going the same places where Jesus went, right? We're just doing that stuff. And other people then finally get a chance not to react out of defense or anger or frustration or fear, but they get to operate out of a sense of curiosity. And I want to suggest to you that curiosity is perhaps one of the most profound tools we have for provoking acts of love. Last week I mentioned the two words curiosity and courage. Because it takes courage to do this. It takes courage to change ourselves. It takes courage to hold back. It takes courage to be vulnerable in these kinds of moments. And what does the word courage mean? It means to have heart. To be at that place where we can open enough to feel here and not here. To feel at the level of our heart and our gut and not at the level of our head and our chemistry. So it takes courage, and it takes this curiosity on our part to entice that from others. I'm going to ask Lisa to come forward real quick. And we're going to do a little song. And it's sort of, it fits with this theme. And then I'm going to wrap up with a thought afterwards. But Lisa's with us today. And whenever Lisa's with us, I just like to have an opportunity to sing. This came to me last night as I was thinking about the impact that we get to have in the world. The difference that we can make in the world, and how subtle that difference can sometimes be, and yet how profound in the long run those small actions, those subtle actions that we do, how much of a profound effect they can have down the line. So let's see if I got some volume here. I don't know which one's the volume. Okay, here we go. Bear with us. We only worked through this one time this morning, and we said it'll be like we're in our living room, and we don't really know what we're doing.
It's pretty normal.
And I haven't played the guitar in a while, so here we go. We get to be a ripple in the water. We get to be a rock that's thrown. We get to be a boy on a bridge, standing over the reservoir. I see the water lap along the shoreline, a buried forest of a man-made lake. Cemeteries are laying underneath it, your heart like a dam when it breaks. We're floating and we're swimming, and in this moment we are forgetting what it costs, what it takes for one perfect love when we look the other way. I'm okay if I don't look a little closer, and I'm okay if I don't see beyond the shore. I'm okay if I don't do the killing or know what the killing is for. We're talking and we're driving, and in this moment we are denying what it costs, what it takes for one perfect world when we look the other way. One perfect world when we look the other way. It's one perfect world when we look the other way. It's one perfect world. You can see beyond the myth of isolation, and the miracle of daybreak doesn't move you anymore. Connect the points and then see the constellations as the night comes down on the reservoir. And we're turning and we're floating, and in this moment we are beholden to what it costs, to what it takes for one perfect world. Can we look the other way? Perfect way. Can we learn to live another way? It's a perfect world. Can we learn to live another way? Perfect world. We get to be a ripple on the water. So we do this prayer, we do this blessing at the end of the service every week now. We've been doing it, and it's this blessing written by this friend that I've met through another friend, Peter Rollins, a guy by the name of Patrick Otuma, and we'll do it at the end of this service. Patrick Otuma is part of a place called the Caramila community. And the Caramila community is in Northern Ireland. It was started back in the 80s, late 80s, around the issues of the Troubles, right around the conflicts between the Protestants and the Catholics, between the English and the Irish in Northern Ireland. And these conflicts had come on for so many years, so many deaths, so much struggle, so much strife, so much prejudice, so much inbred, unknowing hatred. In fact, he tells this wonderful story of the community where youth had come, and they'd had a youth gathering. These were probably 11-year-olds, 12-year-olds, so younger youth, and they were basically kids from some of these higher risk communities, but from both sides of the spectrum. And at one point, they'd had Patrick, who's a priest. He was a priest, a Jesuit priest, and they asked him in one conversation. They said, Patrick, or they said Padre because they called him Father. They said, Padre, I have a question. And he said, okay, fine. And the girl said, God made us all, right? And so she sets up the proposition already, that she's sort of getting the whole thing all set up. And she said, God made us, right? And he says, well, yeah, that's right. God made us. And he said, God made the Catholics. Is that correct? And he said, I guess that's true. God made Catholics. And she said, and God made the Protestants? Yes, that's right. And God loves everybody. And he said, I suppose that's true. And she said, well, then why do we hate the Protestants? And he said, I don't understand. What do you mean by that? And she said, well, all I know is that we hate the Protestants, so how can you say God loves the Protestants if we hate the Protestants? Something's not right there. And he could see already that this wide conflict of thinking was already beginning to take place. It was rooted in her. She hadn't even been born by the time that the peace accord was agreed upon, which was in 1997. She hadn't even been born at that point. It happened in 2012. And so he said something completely surprising, and it's completely provoking, if you will. He said, I don't remember her name, but he said, Ellen, and she said, yeah. And he said, you play football, soccer, right? She says, you play football, and she said, yeah. And she said, you really love football? And she said, yeah. He said, did you know the Protestant team is looking for an amazing forward on their football team? And she smiled and she said, really? And before you know it, she was no longer thinking about the conflict. She was thinking about what she loves. And it went to a different direction entirely. So much of our thinking has nothing to do with reality, right? It has only to do with things that we've inherited or things that we've ingrained in our own thinking or entrained in our own neurology. And to move us beyond that, we have to begin to provoke. We have to find opportunities to create space for where that can happen. One of the stories when he says that they've gathered some people together for a week retreat, and one man who was a Protestant had gathered there, and he had a disdain for the Catholics, but there they were, both of them, Protestant, Catholic, all adults, 20 people, and he had this terrible disdain because his uncle had died earlier in like the 1940s in a conflict, and so he came with a lot of bitterness, and this was not going to work, and you could see why he would think that, why he would have this bitterness, and how deep this thing was for him. But nobody talked about that. Nobody talked about conflicts. Nobody talked about war and violence. Nobody talked about history of hatred. They did things like serving in the community. They did things like planting gardens. They did things like doing other projects together. And somewhere about 8-9 days into the thing, this guy James, he's meeting in a small group of about 10 people. And he says, I have something to ask you. And so they all listen, and he said, I want you to be honest. Are there times when what I say, the words I speak, hurt you? And of course, he was talking to some of the Catholics in the room. He says, I just went up. They all looked at him and they said, oh, James, no, James, you're a good man. We all love you. You're a good man. And he said, don't patronize me. He said, I mean it. Are there times when I have said things that you have found hard to hear and painful? Well, and then they started looking at each other, kind of smiling, and then one of them said, well, let's see, there's that time, and then there was this time, and then there was this time, and then and then another one said, don't forget there was that time, and then by the time they'd started counting them up, they said, I don't know, after the first hour, there was a lot of them to count, And he said, "You're kidding me. The things I have said," and they shared with him the reality that oftentimes we don't know the words that we carry, what kind of power they carry, what kind of a potential hatred or what kind of bias they carry. Language is weaponized all the time without our intention because we live in tribal settings. We live in communities of same thinking. Before we can begin to challenge that, we have to create space in our own minds, in our own spaces, our own presence that allows someone else to come into that place without defensiveness, without that chemistry, without that history. And only then, when we can do that, we begin to provoke this possibility of change. The word caramelia is a funny word, and I love this. Rumi says it this way. Well, here, first of all, the word caramelia, when they established Carmela, the word supposedly meant harmony. And they thought that was perfect because we're talking about the North and the South, the Catholic and the Protestant, and harmony. How many of you experienced perfect harmony in any and all of your relationships? They thought it was really sweet, but 10 years later, they get a visit from an etymologist, a linguistics etymologist, and he says, "Do you know what the real words of caramelia actually mean?" And they said, "Well, no." And he said, "It means place where bumpy hills meet." And they said, "Well, that explains everything." Because that's the reality of it, right? The reality of life isn't harmony, it's more dissonance. But we have to welcome the dissonance and look forward to the consonant moments. Redemption is probably one of the most profound experiences we can ever experience. If you go around and you ask people, what really gives you the deepest joys? Well, you might say, well, it's when I went here and I climbed the mountain, or when I got to do this thing, or when I got to hold my baby child, grandchild. I mean, yeah, we have these wonderful moments, but ask anybody who has reconciled with an estranged parent. Ask anybody who is reconciled with an angry neighbor. Ask anybody who has found a connection they didn't expect to find with somebody on the other side of the political spectrum, and you will see someone who says, "I experienced a miracle. I experienced this profound sense of connection where I never thought there was before. This unexpected wonder." That requires provocation, people. We get to do that. We get to be a ripple in the water. We get to do that. But it requires us being willing to be open spaces for grace to happen. And sometimes that means we have to challenge our own thinking just enough to allow other thoughts to come in, to find other connections, other ways of being together. Last thing I want to share with you. Y'all know this story, right? How many of you all know your Buddhist stories in here, right? Yeah. No? Okay. So, yeah, Lynn's got his hand up. I got a funny story about Lynn. So, Lynn, talking about provocation, Tim, do you mind if I tell your story? So, Tim one day is following a car in the right lane on the highway, my son Tim, and he's driving along behind him, and there's somebody in the van in front of him that's moving really, really slow. And so at some point, Tim's just trying to kind of get around the van and is kind of taking up a little bit of the lane there. And finally, he goes around the van, and my son Tim's just kind of lost his patience, and he doesn't ever do this anymore. He never loses his... No, don't go there. This was Matt that did that? It wasn't Tim? Oh. All right. I'm so glad you're here. Yeah. I get my boys confused all the time. So, it was Matt that did that, really? You don't know how many times I've said it was you. So Matt pulls, that explains everything. So Matt pulls around beside him and then he flips him off and then speeds on ahead. But as he flips him off, he looks back and he says, "Oh my gosh." And he realizes who it was. And then he immediately pulls over, when he gets to the parking lot, he pulls in and he texts Mom and he says to his mom, "Mom, I feel terrible. I just flipped off Jesus." Well, because we have this wonderful image. Oh. All right. My sons provide me with ample material, right? Yes, right. The same kind of thing, yeah. This is an interesting sort of reality that we find ourselves in these impatient moments all the time and never realize where our actions go, where our ripples continue to move beyond us. And yet we have these opportunities to create space on the highway, at the business place, the workplace. Somebody's not working cooperatively with us. That's an opportunity to create a space of grace even there. And so we have all of these wonderful chances to do that. So this wonderful little Buddhist story goes like this. The student went to his master. I found it in the book of Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. Some of y'all know this. Robert Pirsig was telling his son about something, and his son asks him a question, and Robert tells his son, he says, so this master was looking at his student, and his student said, Master, does a dog have Buddha nature or not? To which the master replies the famous response of, moo. Now, we take that to mean something completely ridiculous, like the sound of a cow, but the actual meaning, Japanese meaning of the word moo, means neither or. Ask a better question. That's what it means. Sometimes I think when we find ourselves in prayer, when we find ourselves in a situation with someone else, when we find ourselves in these conflicts we see about in news and we've already made up our mind, I think, moo, it's neither or. We've got to ask a better question. And when we do that, we begin to provoke a place where all of us can find this kingdom together. Amen.
What do you see when you turn out the light? I can't tell, but I know that it's mine. Oh, I get by with a little help from my friends. I get high with a little help from my friends. I'm gonna try with a little help from my friends. Do you need anybody? I need somebody to love. Could it be anybody? I want somebody to love. Oh, I get by with a little help from my friends. I'm gonna try with a little help from my friends. Oh, I get by with a little help from my friends. Yes, I get by with a little help from my friends. Help from my friends.
So let's all stand, and boy, I should have had my watch up in front of there. I had Sharm sitting right there in front of me, so I realized what time it was here. We'll try not to do this next week, but you guys, so good to see you today. So I'm going to read to you Padraic Otuma's blessing again. We'll use it up until we get towards Easter, and as we make our way through this next week, thinking about all the ways in which we are part of a larger picture. So we come in less with trying to force the peace and more with trying to feel where we fit in. Let's pray. Go in pieces. Our ideas have been upended and our faith rear-ended, and yet something continues to be mended. So go in pieces. And in all of the unraveling, we are traveling together into something larger of which we are all a part, to invite the intrusions, to diffuse the illusions, and to find a place of meeting again. So go in pieces to see and feel and share the world anew. Amen.